Hey y'all,
Good morning.
how's it going?
Good.
Sorry, I was like rushing to finish editing a thesis chapter, and I was like, I gotta send it out to the student really fast. So I'm like on time, but it's stressing me out because I like to be early. Well, we have a really small class today. Do you think everybody's just like waiting to get on, or do you think this is like, oh no, we don't need you? Can't tell. I can't tell either. It took me a minute to figure out what Nate was doing. I realized now he's getting like this cup and he was doing something, but it was like, what am I looking at? Like I was very confused for a minute. Way to be, Nate. Get your drink.
It's cooking.
Yeah. Oh, hey, what are you making for everybody? You gonna send it around? He's back on mute. Okay, so housekeeping. Olivia, I saw your paper. For reference, I did change the deadline. It was supposed to always have been Thursday. So if you're more than welcome to go change it. If you're like, you don't have to. I'm happy if whatever you turn in is fine. I think it's lovely. I haven't looked at it at all. But I'm sure it's quality work. What I wanted to, that was my housekeeping for the day, is I hadn't changed all we had talked a lot about deadlines and things, and I hadn't changed them on Canvas. And so I'm sorry for that, guys. It was running around like a chicken with your head cut off, and it's kind of last minute. I was like, oh, I didn't realize it still showed on Tuesday, because I think at one point I was like, yeah, we'll just go ahead and make your paper due on Tuesday so I could break it up. But I think y'all are dealing with a lot of stuff, and so I wanted you to have however much time you needed. So if you needed the extra few days to finish your paper. I also recognize that this is last week of class and you're doing a lot of things. The exam should open to Wednesday morning, so tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. and then we'll close Thursday night at 11:59 p.m. And so you should have I think I gave you 2 hours. I'm pretty sure I updated them both of the exams, so you should have 2 hours. I will double check again, just make sure I updated. Haven't officially put the exam in, so I'll make sure when I go put the exam in that it's good to go. I was reading it. No, I did. I put the exam in yesterday. So many things have happened. I'm sure you also have the same problem that I do, which is just have 1,000 things coming at you all at once and about 1 million emails, because it's not like somebody can like walk down to your office or like catch you in the hall and be like, hey, can you do this thing? Or tell you in class, because things are all craziness. Anyways, so I've written the exam. Oh, there's somebody else. I've written the exam, and at first I was like, oh, I don't know. We only had like this kind of basically 1.5 sections of stuff. It was really one good section and like a little bit of another one. And at first I was afraid, I was petrified that I was only going to have a really small exam to have by your side. And I spent so many nights thinking how he did me wrong. I'm just kidding. I'll be done now. And so, which is also fun because this is recording. I'm gonna put this on YouTube, so anybody who misses this is gonna see this. And so this song is now in perpetuity, forever. But I've looked, not one of you have ever gone out and looked at these videos. I haven't checked in the past like 3 days, but up until the other day, nobody had watched it more than like 2 minutes, and it was like one person. And I'm pretty sure that was me when I was making sure it was working. So just saying, I don't even know why you all fought to have me record these and post them online. But I started writing the exam, and I think that I think that we had plenty of material. I think the next class, and especially because I won't be traveling or won't have the intentions, I think I'll break the exams up a little better. But for you guys, this is what we have. So we basically are covering. Let me get my note out here, because we had trade policy on the previous exam, and so I didn't go back and include anything other than general information that you should know anyways. So I'm not retesting you on previous material, but things build on each other, so you should still have concepts, and so that language shouldn't go away. I think I included from the previous, we talked about it after the exam, or after the previous exam, but so it starts from like intra-industry trade and on all that discussions where we talked about exports and re-exports and introp trade and those concepts. And then we moved into political economy of ag. And so that's where the exam, and then I think the last class we ended on ag trade and development. And I think I have some kind of question related to that on the exam. So because the exam is open note and open books, I think you get like, it's not super definitional, right? I mean, it's the same format as you had last time, which is just a few definitions and then short answers. And so just remember that like, I ask you to define things to me, but like, I get that you have your notes. You can literally just type in those things. A lot of my questions are asking you to like, explain why, like how to apply that in the real world in some way. And so I have, let me see how many really cheesy jokes I have in here. Just one. The other class I have good cheesy jokes, and I want to see if anybody gets them. This only has one, and I told a friend of mine, and she didn't get the reference. And I explained to her. Once I explained to her, she was like, "That's funny." And then I was like, "I'll see if any of you get it." So if you see a silly thing in there and you get it, there's a little smiley face or something, just you know that I got it, ha ha ha. Because this is the small bits of joy I can find in life, okay, is to put silly things in your exams and force you to like write it back to me, like in your last exam when I made you put that turkey makes gravy and grease makes chicken, because I find that funny when you have to type that out for me. Anyways, so yeah, so the exam is covering everything from the intra-industry trade all the way up through the research and developments, which is basically section 4, very teeny little end of section 3 that wasn't on the previous exam, and the teeny tiny part of section 5, which is where we are. So I guess I can open it up to general questions if anybody has any.
Can we go over the ag development a little more? Because I don't have much about it.
Yeah, so we didn't talk a lot about it, and which you're like, oh my God, then how did you write a question? Because I'm sneaky like this. I'm really energetic this morning. I don't know if you can tell this, but I can tell this. It's probably also the stir crazy being at home by myself for so long, and the amount of work that's on my desk. So, true, Christina, I'm actually going to answer. I do come back to this. So when we talked about, I wanted, in terms of the development, what we really focused on was this idea of that 15% of the world's population lives in poverty, and that how we affect, oh, Nate accidentally clicked off, or he didn't accidentally click off, but he's screwed it up. No, his iPhone's in there. He just took his video off. I see. Anyways, so we talked about this, the number of people living in poverty. And then really what I wanted to get into is this, what we discussed was this, the effect of trade policies on low income countries, or kind of these low income countries. And so let me see if I had it in my notes, what I actually talked about. Oh, that's the wrong class. Currency exchange, balance of trade. Yeah, so it's like, we literally had like a teeny tiny part, and it was just the 15% of the world population. Basically that these high income countries, okay, let me start over. We talked about how the effects of policies that we make in high income countries. So example, the US makes subsidy policies, right? So an example would be milk, right? So these high income countries around the world have these very big protectionist dairy policies. And the problem with that is it leads to this excess supply. Well, what do we do with excess supply?
We can dump it?
Yeah, we dump it. I mean, that's what we do. We just try to sell it places. Well, the argument is that we dump it, and where do we dump it the most? In low-income countries, because they don't have a market or they don't have access. And we're like, and there are people who argue, like, oh, well, we're helping them out. We're giving them this cheap milk so they have access to it, which you could say, oh, yeah, that's great. Not so great, because think about the person in that country who's trying to produce milk, right? And the argument behind that is that by dumping that milk, we make it even harder for them to make a living. And there's this kind of argument of comparative advantage, is like, oh, well, they're not being as efficient at production, and so they shouldn't be producing milk anyway. They should buy our milk, and we should do something else. The counter argument to that is we're not producing milk because we're more efficient. We're producing that milk because we've subsidized it. And so the argument that we talked about in this kind of effects on development is how our policy, I don't even know if this is the question I asked you. Let me make sure before. I will read my question, but I need to finish this. Like one of the big things that I wanted to finish up the other day, and I evidently didn't cover it very well, so good on you for asking, is that we want to make sure that we understand that the effects of these policies aren't related just to the country you're in. And it's not related to between the US and China going at it because we're trying to say who's trading better and who's, who has this, that we have these reaching effects. And we need to make sure that we understand that, like, hey, we can protect our industries, and we want to protect our farmers, and all of that is great. And it's not to say that it's wrong. We also need to understand the implications of those things. And in developing countries, sometimes they bear the burden of this. One of the other things is this kind of exploitation of resources in these low-income countries, is that this idea of, hey, it's cheaper to use your labor, right? But we don't, have the same standards, or we don't have the OSHA, or we're getting around environmental rules, which means that we're polluting and doing all these things in other countries. And maybe an argument is that we apply rules to them. We say, hey, regardless of where you're producing, if you're going to sell this in the US, you have to be produced using these OSHA standards or using whatever rules. And I'm not saying it has to be like that. These are just ideas. Or we might say, you still have to abide by this certain environmental standards regardless of where you're producing. Now, we're not doing that because that's a pretty far reaching, and there's an argument between the rights of individual countries to govern themselves. And this would be coming from the idea of, we're putting pressure on the firms, saying like, hey, you can sell whatever you want, you can produce wherever you want, but you have to follow these standards. Because the argument that we make is that sometimes those goods that are coming from low-income countries, or this exploitation we're doing, don't capture all of the actual costs. There's externalities, right? And those externalities aren't associated with the costs with those goods. We didn't say all of this on Thursday, but this is a summary of all the things I have mentioned throughout the whole semester about development, coupled with the things I mentioned on Thursday. And I don't think it's in the exam. Briefly, I mentioned the Gini index, and it's a measure of income equality. And so kind of the further we get away from income inequality, and how that affects different wealth distributions around the world. But hold on, can you wait? Let me see if I can find the question that's my trade one. Or they're all trade. That's what this class is. The one that's related to development. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I feel like our discussion just covered that. Should be good to go. Do you have any more? Do you have like any follow-up on that? I mean, I have some more. I had more notes. We're just not covering them all because unless we're done with our questions, and then I'll cover some more of it. But we talked about high cost of compliance, that sometimes meeting international standards is really expensive. I talked about, sometimes that we put, like, I think I gave you the example of fair trade. And I said, hey, fair trade's really great. It's, says no child labor and all these other things. But sometimes the people we're trying to affect, use child labor. I gave the example of, like, we all worked on our farms at home, right? Like, we all did things. But like, if somebody made us be registered, our parents couldn't have got registered as fair trade because we worked on their farms. And so this idea of like who you're impacting were the people you weren't trying to impact. Like you wanted to help the farmer who's like the low guy who, who's trying to make it in the world, pulled myself out of bootstraps, and you're basically excluding him because, he's got a family and that's who's helping his small farm. And so there's a little bit of this kind of idea of the balance of policies that we're going to create and how they're going to affect people. And so never mind. There was a book on fair trade, and then I remember I took notes off the side because I was like, well, you're ignoring this. And so there is a book about the effects of like kind of these policies on low-income countries, but I can't think of it right now. Anyways, anybody have any questions on that, or any other questions? Actually, on this before we move off. But does everybody good on that, or do you feel comfortable? Yeah, Nate.
Sorry. Is that book called like the life and travels of a t-shirt or something like that? Is it like cotton related? Because that one does a lot about like the effects of ag policy in America on like the rest of the world.
No, but that is also a really great book. This was like this small, it was this little book I found. I was in Oxford once, and I walked to the Oxford library, and they had a bookstore, and I was like, I'm gonna buy a book while I'm in Oxford because that's really fun. And so it was this book as like no nonsense about fair trade and equality. something like that in the title. And but the t-shirt, the life and times of a t-shirt, I think, anyways, is also a good example of that. How like, listen, our policies affect people all around the world, and it's not to say that like anything in this class, it's not to say that anything is inherently good or bad, right? Like having trade policies aren't bad. Like trading the world is not bad, right? Outsourcing is not bad. It's just that whenever we're not able to account for those costs associated with those effects in the cost of the good that's being sold. And it's the same in the US, right? Like we make the same argument with production of a lot of goods when we have this pollution that happens, right? And we say, oh, well, you know, this, like, it doesn't cost as much for coal production. You're like, okay, well, it doesn't, but like, we're also not accounting oftentimes for some of the pollution that exists. Or same thing with nuclear power. We don't account for the cost of disposing, you know, the reactors and after the facts. And so, you know, just anything when you're not accounting for the externalities, which is where a lot of environmental economists come in. And that's a whole different study field. I could direct you to a lot of different people who study that. Any other questions about this or development? I just want to make sure that you're all good with this concept because it was super brief. We talked about it, peppered it throughout the semester, but it was super brief on Thursday. Nope. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions for the exam? Nobody has any questions for the exam? I either feel like it means that I'm super awesome and I've just covered everything so well, or not.
I want to know if we should expect graphs again.
Nope, you should not expect graphs. So there wasn't anything that we had graphs in this last section, and even if we could formally like think about it in a graph way, it's not worth it. Like there was nothing like the last one. We kind of had to have graphs in order to explain movements and trade and tariffs and things. There's nothing where we have to have a graph in this one. So no graphs. I don't think there's any numerical answers. I think they're all just like, yeah, there's no numerical answers. I mean, we didn't do any math in this last section, did we? I didn't see anything. I literally went from the beginning of what we talked about to the end. So this exam is really cerebral. It's really kind of the application of the notes we've taken into, you know, a question, you know, yeah. So the no graphs and no math.
Thank you.
Could we do kind of like we did last time where, you know, if these questions are going to be like a little more, like you say, cerebral based, could we go over like an example, even if it's not exactly like just the kind of template that we could expect?
Yeah. So, so and then again, it's like all sorts of, because they're all, you know, all the questions are all over all of your notes. So it would be something like if I brought up, you know, like let's pretend you're in a country. So I try to do a lot of these things that were like, hey, you were and probably for both of the classes, which is why my brain's stuck on it. But like for this one, it would be like, you know, you got hired by, you know, Germany to talk about how they could their trade deficit. Why, you know, what would you know, that Angela Merkel is asking you why they have a trade deficit and how they could address that. What, you know, what would you tell them? What would you tell, you know, Chancellor Merkel? And how would you describe, you know, how they address it? Why is that a problem? Why is it not a problem? And so let's talk about that. So like, if you know, and this is not a question, well, tangentially related to questions on your exam, but like, so if Angela Merkel was asking you and you wanted to know what was the benefit of, you know, if she has a trade deficit, is that a problem? So, you know, so that's a question, like, is it a problem if they have a trade deficit? And think about like kind of classical theory. So how about one of you tell me if that's a problem or not? It is not a problem. Why is it not a problem? It's fun.
Is it because like balance of trade doesn't include a lot of the investments and other things that go back and forth? It just looks at your like export import.
Yeah,
it's not
that's
like
totally
bullshit.
it. So this is one of those, and that's part of the value of these questions on this exam for me is that there's not actually one right answer. There's multiple things you could say. There's lots of ways you can defend that. That is totally one really definitive argument. As you say, hey, that we're excluding all financial transactions, and that maybe Germany has moved away from labor-intensive jobs and moved into this kind of financial realm. Is it like there's this huge financial market in Berlin? I'm not expecting you to know there's a huge financial market, but you could say, hey, it's not accounting for this financial stuff. What's another reason why we might not worry about a deficit in Germany?
In the long run, trade will balance out.
Yeah, so we talk about classical theory here that says, hey, trade deficits are a snapshot in time, and that over the life of a country, and the countries, aren't measured in human decades, right? Like our human lives, like a country has exists for much way before me and way after me, and we might think that classical theory says that they're going to balance out at some point. That given enough time.
What are you doing? Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
I was like, oh my God, I don't know what she's saying to me. It sounds all German because she wasn't talking to me. That we might say that over the long run that everything is going to balance out. That kind of given that there's a flexible exchange rate system that that countries are going to even out, and that eventually that balance of trade will be fine, right? Is there anything? I mean, I don't have. Those are the two that were sticking out of my head, but make sure I don't have anything. I think that was floating exchange rates, balance of trade exception, cost of oh, and then like we might think about the kind of things that influence that. So there's influences balance of trade. So, and I don't remember if that's something that I added onto a question that was similar to what I just asked you. It's like, we might think about, tariffs or these kind of other structures are going to influence this deficit. We might, and I don't think I specifically asked you, and this is something we talked about in class, but this J-curve effect, that even as countries are balancing out, there's this weird phenomenon where they get worse before they get better. And so you could argue that maybe they're really worse right now on Angla because they're going to get better, kind of in looking at this time horizon. And that gets us to that adjustment path that we talked about in class, where we said, hey, there's an adjustment path, and that trade deficits, that every kind of policy that change. And so this is one of the arguments that people make with, God, my computer's dirty, make with the United States, is that we have a new president so often, and they're making sometimes very just separate type of decisions that that we're always having, our paths are always readjusting, right? We're trucking down, we're like, no, we don't like that. And so we jump over here and we're on a new adjustment path, and maybe it's going down, and they're like, no. And so we're changing so much that kind of this idea that like something is inherently bad is like, well, I don't know, because in a few years those policies might change, or the ways that our adjustment path we're on. That was an example of a type of question. Again, I have, there might be some question could be like a defense of free trade, or explaining why we might support or not support free trade. So pretending you are, again, somebody in you're Minnesota, right? Like, why the heck would you support free trade in Minnesota? Why would you not? So why would you support free trade in Minnesota?
You can get things like fruit or other goods that you would otherwise never get in Minnesota.
Yeah, heck yeah, right? Like if I live in Minnesota, I will never have, oranges. I would never be able to produce oranges in Minnesota. I mean, it would be so cost prohibitive to even attempt to, right? Like you're having to heat a greenhouse in the middle of winter in Minnesota is going to be ridiculously expensive, right? So I'm not going to have these things. So access to food, seasonal foods, right? That's a good reason to support free trade. Why else might I want to support free trade in Minnesota?
When you ask that kind of question, are you trying to say we should say the advantage of participating in free trade?
Yeah, yeah. When I asked the questions, a question like that would be, tell me why you should support free trade, or tell me why you should not support free trade. So I'm looking for kind of the advantages and the disadvantages of free trade.
Thank you.
So what might be another advantage of free trade for Minnesota?
You have lower tariffs.
Yeah, so if I want free trade, then I'm going to have lower tariff. Where's Minnesota in the U.S.? Yeah, Olivia, it's really far north. What's it really close to?
Canada.
Oh, Canada, right? Like, blame Canada. If I'm Minnesota, I really want to support free trade because I'm going to want to move things across that border. Because it is easier for me to trade with Minnesota than it is for me to trade with Florida, right? Like, just distance-wise. And so, and again, the question's not really about Minnesota, so this doesn't matter. And that's not, if you understand geography, then that's a great answer for you. If you don't, then, you move to all the other advantages of free trade. But you might think about like geographically beneficial things, right? Like, I might support free trade because it's beneficial to me. One of the, I can't remember one of the examples I had in class. It was this discussion of like, people were buying things from Minnesota because it was cheaper or from Canada, because it was cheaper to get feed from Canada than it was to get the closest feed mill in their state. And I don't remember if it was like Wisconsin or no, it was somewhere up there that I think I gave that example. You don't have to remember. I did talk about it. But the idea is, location-wise, maybe I want a free trade from Minnesota because it just gives me access to markets that I'm already super close to. What's a reason why I might not want to have free trade, like a disadvantage of free trade, if I'm Minnesota?
There could be a good that's like pretty, has a lot of manufacturers or things like that are local that would otherwise be like competitively driven in a negative way when there's when they're like bringing in other people's goods.
Yeah, so let's expand this question and say that the question actually says, you're a Minnesota dairy farmer, and and we want to know if, as a Minnesota dairy farmer, do you support free trade? Why should you support free trade? Why should you not support free trade? Defend both of those reasons. Give me examples of advantages and disadvantages. That's the type of question you're going to get. Now explain so as a Minnesota dairy farmer, Nate's disadvantage is totally true, right? Because in Canada, they produce a lot of milk. They have a huge subsidy program in Canada. I mean, let's be clear, we also subsidize milk too. But they have the subsidy program in Canada. And so what it does is it puts pressure on our milk supplies, right? So we can't export that milk. And typically they're exporting their milk to us for various reasons. But, and so a disadvantage might just be that now I've increased my competition. I want you to protect my market a little bit as a dairy farmer in Minnesota, right? But now let's pretend that I'm what's something else I don't know what Minnesota produces. I picked a terrible state because I don't know very much about it. Let's say they're producing something like cherries are produced a lot in Michigan. For some reason, I didn't know that cherries produced in Michigan, but so let's pretend that Minnesota also produces cherries. So let's say that now you're a cherry farmer in Minnesota, and it can't be produced in Canada. These cherries can't produce in Canada. It's too cold the further north you go. So all this. Now why you might have this, that whole argument flips on its head, right? Like, is now I want to have access to those markets because now I can sell them. So a lot of times, I guess the crux of all of this is your position and who you are and what you're thinking about. And so obviously I'm not giving Minnesota. And what I would give you would be something that you should be aware of, or you're not going to have to just have a random geography test. Although I did give you, does anybody know the smallest countries in the world? I put this in there and I started to tell you. Yeah. Christina, what are the smallest countries in the world?
Vatican City.
Uh-huh.
Luxembourg.
Mm-hmm. It's teeny tiny too.
Monaco.
Yeah, it's very small. There's another one in Italy.
Because I just looked this up like a week ago. I don't remember the one in Italy.
Yeah, so it's San Marino. I use the Vatican City as one of the examples I gave you all. Just for reference, Vatican City is led by a president, not the Pope. I feel like the Pope should be the president of Vatican City. I mean, no, they have a president, which is also, I think, a bishop. Just I started to put that in, and I was like, well, this is way too much detail for this question. Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't pertain to the answer that you need to give. I started to be like, not the Pope, the president. And then so anyways, but like for that question, it doesn't matter that I'm talking about the Vatican City, right? Like we're talking about the Vatican City, and it's just a setup for whatever the rest of the question is. Assuming that Nate also would like to, and then are you all good with the free trade question? I assume we are. We kind of talked through it and felt pretty good about it. I assume that you also maybe would like another example of another type of question you might hear or think about. Because again, a lot of it is just like, tell me why, like, explain this. We might think of, so I guess like some of these, it's hard to like think of another question that's like it because it's like very specific. We talked about like the Uruguay round and the different types of because trade governance is a big section of part of this political economy, and so I would know. I mean, again, it's a pretty small section that it's a very. We only have one and a half sections. I know we talked about it a lot, but it was it's one section. But we talked about this kind of trade governance, so I would know the progression, why we went to different ways. We talked about multilateral trade agreements, but one of the things in the Uruguay round, because that was kind of the most influential, because it changed so many things, right? We started the WTO. We added, included all these different policies, and one of the things that we included during the Uruguay round was this agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And so this was this agreement that basically harmonized the way we're going to deal with sanitary and phytosanitary, or these things that affect human, plant, and animal health. And it was this idea of moving away from, because the whole point of the Uruguay round was to move away from these non-tariff trade barriers, right? That was one of the arguments that were being made. And because we had a thing called what? Tarification. What is tarification? Ideas here.
Trying to move your like non-tariff trade barriers into actual like named tariffs and then reduce those tariffs.
Yeah, so that was a huge thing. That was the WTO was created, and we said, hey, let's do this tarification. Sorry, I can't talk and text. I was chatting. I was not texting my friend. And so we so we had this, we wanted this tarification, and so we brought in this idea of this part of the other thing was, well, how do we get rid of these non-tariff trade barriers? Because there are legitimate reasons why we might want to protect ourselves from animal and plant health, but we also want to make sure that we're all using the same standards. And so the application, the agreement on the application for sanitary and phytosanitary measures was necessary to protect human, animal, and plant health life. We made a codex we basically created the Organization for Animal Health. We created the International Plant Protection Convention. We argued that it should create some kind of appropriate level of protection for that you're allowed to have some level of protection, but that it has to be with the cognizant way if you're trying to minimize disruptions to trade. And so that was one of the things, is that people were using these health events, these animal or plant or human health events, and saying, hey, this is our way of stopping trade because we just want to stop trade. And this way we came out and say, hey, we're all going to have some kind of international scientific standards now. And so you're allowed to have protections, and you're still allowed to set your own standards, but those standards can't be based on bad science. They can't just be, you can't pull it out of a hat and be like, yeah, some guy said that if Nathan, I can't think of anybody's last name. If Molly Bolin lived in the state where this thing was, was created, you can't export it. That's phooey, right? Like that's crap science. And so the idea of harmonization and this agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures basically said, hey, we're going to have some kind of standard, and that you have to have the objective of reducing your impacts on trade. And so we can also show, I did this, well, sorry, I was about to just go off on a rant. But the idea behind those is that we are that's why we care about this harmonization, right? Is because it's minimizing trade disruptions. Is what we might. I'm not asking you a question right now. We're going over it because it was. So can somebody? So we just went through all this idea of what this harmonization was. Can somebody give me an example of like how we apply this harmonization in the real world? Like why? Like give me like we say, oh yeah, this matters, but like don't just trust me. Tell me how. Like can somebody give me an example of how that matters in the real world? We talked about multiple in class, so.
We talked about how like China kind of used non-tariff, like their what is it, like country of origin or like area of origin labeling.
Yeah.
Only as like it was originally to save them from mad cow disease, I think is what we talked about. And it's been like 20 years and they're still using it, and so at this point it's just predatory.
Yeah.
I think that was important for us.
It's a great answer, Nathan. Does anybody have another example of what one we might think about?
If GMOs in Europe, does that count? As in just like how the US views them and how Europe uses them or views them?
So I'm going to clarify that it is not just the views of those in the different countries. It's when they apply those views in terms of restricting trade. So like, I will give you an example. I think I talked about this paper in class. This was my master's thesis. And I talked about how we had this rice contamination in the US where there was this genetically modified that switched to accidentally crossbred with this regular rice, and it got shipped. And so in the US, the standards that we were applying was less than 0.01 or 0.1, which is a 10% standard, which is internationally normal, right? And so we shipped all this rice because we said, yeah, it doesn't have any GMOs. There's no problems with this kind of any type of cross-contamination. It gets to the port in the European Union, and they tested it at the 1,000% level. Well, they found at the 1,000% level that there were a few grains of rice that had this GM, that had crossbred. And so then they rejected all this rice from the US. And so that's an example of the, and so then it was this like big fight because it was like, okay, but you're not testing at a normal level. You're testing at this kind of like, you're not testing at some kind of scientific to allow for any type of allowance. You're saying nothing at all. And we're arguing that like it's an equivalent, like you've even approved it in the EU, but like, and so using that as an example would be, hey, the EU said we want to have these extra strong standards, and the international community said, well, wait a minute, you can't have, that is not kind of scientifically sound statements to make. And I think that there was a settlement between the two countries, but they didn't accept the rice. We had to dump some of it in the port of Rotterdam. We shipped some of it to Mexico, all the stuff we couldn't normally ship to EU, bless you, Maryland. And so, so we had to kind of do that. So that's an example of how somebody applied to using your GMO stuff. And there's other ones too, but that's an example. Does anybody have another example? I mean, there's more than, these are just silly ones we come up with. No, nobody has anything. They're like 9. I imagine that, like, I mean, and you can kind of just make up Russia, and again, part of this is just that these Russia banned poultry trade in the, I know we always talk about the 90s, that's still true, but banned poultry trade in the later 2000s when we had avian influenza, because they said, hey, you had avian influenza. We had avian influenza in 2015, and it was a big deal in the US. And so a lot of countries banned poultry trade from the US because they didn't want to get avian influenza. They were trying to stop the spread of it, which is fine. That's using harmony systems, right? Like, that's great. The deal is, though, after the end of a disease, the OIE, which is what this agreement set up, they said, hey, we have this kind of organization that's going to set standards, said, 2 or 3 months after the end of a disease, you should be able to resume trade. And Russia didn't. They just kept it on for another 6 to 8 months. And the argument was they were protecting their trade, and they were saying that they were protecting it from this disease spread, even though international standards said that they didn't. And so that's another example of how this is using that. And we talk about the WTO. Now the U.S., which I don't think we took them to court, or we might have, we probably have filed something with them, with all these countries who kind of, who didn't take their trade restrictions off. But now we have a ways and to go to the WTO and say, hey, listen, here's the standard. They didn't apply the standard, right? And so now we can have some recourse against them. Because what is the WTO's value? Is that it can create these, a way to some governing body to say, hey, you're having a fight, and let's I can't think of my words right now. They help solve the fights between people, between these countries. And so with this kind of harmonization, it gives you kind of credence to what you're trying to say and argue. Yeah. Does anybody have another example? And you can do that with anything. Any, does anybody have another example? I mean, we've had quite a few, and I assume that will be sufficient. Okay. Does anybody have another question? No, nobody has questions. We're all questioned out. I think of just really quickly. I'm gonna run down the topics, big topics that are super important. Inter-industry trade. I definitely review that. We talked about free trade, its advantages and disadvantages. This harmonization of health and sanitary standards, and the agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures. We talked about trade deficits and the balance of trade. Foreign direct investment. We might want to think about. We talked about that in class. We talked about some of the problems that exist with those. I'm going to finish this and we'll go back to that one in a second. We've talked about, you should know about the global trade governance, how it exists and develop and what they do and things like that. We talked about development and the issues of international trade on development and kind of these low income countries and the effects of policies around the world on low income countries. And then kind of finally, like multilateral trade agreements. And we talk a lot about those, about classifications of those. One of the things we discussed in our example earlier was with Germany, right? That was the example we had. Another thing we talked about the example earlier with the trade deficit of Germany. Another argument we could make with that is that Germany is part of an economic union, right? And so we could say that Germany doesn't have control of their own monetary and fiscal policies. And so that might have been a reason why they're going to have Angela Merkel. This is the reason why you might have a deficit, is because you don't get to control, your financial situation, which is argument why Greece had so many problems a few years ago. One of the arguments was that they couldn't control the monetary policy. So where if they had been autonomous, they might have adjusted their fiscal policy so that their country basically didn't go into bankruptcy. But they didn't, because they were part of the EU, and that financial situation was in Berlin and Brussels, head of the EU. And so, there's these kind of ideas about, that combination of how trade agreements and how an example of those trade agreements and what the benefits of those might be. I said I would come back. Foreign direct investment. That was one of those things we talked about towards the end of class, where we were discussing this, people are moving. I guess we talked about it a little bit this morning. People are investing in different places, and that there are pros and cons of that, right? Like there are aspects of, moving if you're capital intensive. So give me an example of why we might support foreign direct investment, or why foreign direct investment might make sense.
I think Justin had said, and then we ended up including that it kind of diversifies assets.
Yeah, no, that's totally a reason. We might also think that diversifying assets, like getting something out there that I want to, if I have all my assets on a country in the middle of the ocean that is going to have a volcano erupt, then it's probably not as safe. It's not risk diversified, right? I should probably have assets other places. It's the same reason why on Google doesn't have computer servers all in one place. They're all over the country and they're being used for all sorts of different things. And the information that's on Google isn't stored in one place. It's stored in, it's piecewise in all the different places, so that basically they can't never lose anything unless nuclear holocaust wipes out everything. And then I guess you don't care about Google anyways. So, you know, so that's an example. What's another reason why we might support, you know, foreign direct investment, or understand why people would foreign direct invest?
Like the knowledge and technology transfer.
Yeah, we might want to support them, that, you know, that people are going to transfer knowledge or technology, that like, I want to go study from you because you're going to be able to teach me the things I don't know, right? And that I'm going to spread that information with you. And so if I invest in your country, now I have a place and a role, that I'm going to have more access to, you know, to learn from you for that. What's another one? I guess
Like to take advantage of low labor costs, possibly.
low labor cost. Yeah. The access to low labor, which is going to get to that idea. Remember when I said you not actually have to have things from the earlier exam? This would be one of those. So when we talk about labor intensive and capital intensive, if I'm a capital intensive, you know, country or firm, right? I might want to have I'm going to go invest my capital in another country that has labor intensive, so they can produce labor intensive goods, right? And so it's just this division of labor and capital intensive. And so that might be also a reason why, as a country, I want somebody to foreign direct invest, right? Like, I have all the labor, I just don't have the capital to invest in things. Well, great, you give me your money and I'll do the thing, and then I'll, you know, give you the products of my labor. So there are these advantages of foreign direct investment, and one of those might be that you create jobs, right? That there's capital inflow and that you create jobs. The other way is that, you know, you create financial, there's financial incentives, that you have increased productivity. You have knowledge and technology transfer, right? That Sam Olivia talked about. Now, these are all good things. What are the bad things associated with foreign direct investment?
You're exploiting labor and raw materials.
Yeah, we're going to exploit labor and raw materials. That the likelihood is that we're going in because it's cheap, so we're going to buy it all up, and we're going to, you know, use it to its last you know, nth of use, and then we're going to walk away, and that might not be how the use we should have had with it. I don't know what that is. Oh, that was a note for research yesterday. So I was going to take a note to myself. I was trying to think about who hasn't been online in a while, and I was like, I should email them because I'm slightly concerned for these people. Slightly. Obviously, I'm concerned. I wrote their names down so that I could email them. And so, you know, we think about what's another disadvantage of foreign direct investment. Whoa, it's a dead silence. So let's all, Nate's in a band, right? Did you tell us that in this class or the other class? Okay, this class, right? Nate's in a band, and Nate decides that he's going to have some, you know, some investors like, yeah, dude, man, we want the basement, or something like that. Oh, it was? Good. No, you know, some dude's like, man, I've heard you know, it's some recordings of the basement. I'm going to be your manager. I'm going to fund you guys, but I'm going to have all final say over where the band plays and how you distribute your music, right? Nate, that might be a good thing, right? Like, Nate might want the value of having, you know, this additional income. Those income streams are great for him. What might he hate about that?
I mean, in that case, there's like no control, and so yeah. Same applies globally, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just taking this like, and the deal is half the time, like, these small examples are applied for like large countries as well. I mean, you can't always say that a country acts the same as a human, which is what we'd like to do. We'd like to think like that, and countries have their lifespans are bigger, so we, you know, trade deficits don't matter as much because there's a longer run. But totally, this control issue is a problem. They, as the basement might not want to sign with that guy because he's trying to take up, or person, it might be one, I don't know, it's trying to take up too much, operational control over the band. And they're going to say, I can't work like this, and throw tables over, right? And the band breaks up and they create a new band. They don't want to have this kind of control. One of the disadvantages of foreign direct investment is you're allowing another country to have some kind of control over your firm or something, or resources. And do we want that? Do we want to allow this kind of foreign control so that they have the final say over certain things? We might also think about it is that a disadvantage is that manager that's trying to buy out Nate and their band and try to say, I'll manage you for all that, right? That manager's company says, hey, wait a minute, I don't want to send all my money to the basement. I'm not sure about the basement, let's support our in-house bands we already have. Same thing applies on a global scale, is that we might be concerned with where we're sending money to, and we're sending out of our home country and into a foreign country. And so there's a little bit of this argument. It's the same way that people talk about remittance monies. So it's where a foreign national comes in the country and then sends money back to their country, so to help support. So a lot of people who come here to get jobs because it like doing anything, and they'll send money home to help support like a family or to help get their family, food and things. That's the money. Downstairs, man, that wasn't as good as I thought it was. I'm so sorry. Downstairs, not the basement. I had a dream that I had it right, and I did not. Anyways, and so I don't remember where I was going with this. Because I lost my train of thought because I got so excited and then sad and then excited and then sad. Anyways, so just moving money around, there's pros and cons to foreign direct investment and why we might want to support and not support it. Okay. Are there any other questions? I don't have anything else to tell you unless you got any questions. We could talk about current events. I had a section on like a few current topics. They won't be on your exam though, because I'm not gonna to include those. I think the only one is, most of it's just this like, I don't know. The biggest one is like sugar, because I think it's ridiculous that we have such a small sugar amount of people and how much money we support it with. And those people fight really hard to keep their support, which is, I understand, but we do it. Anyways, are there any questions? That's the moral of this. Nope, you're all good. For reference, I have, close that. Let me tell you how many I have. Course evaluation. Dang it. Hold on a second. It's gotta do the stupid, what's it called? Duo Mobile. Y'all have to do that too, don't you? Stupid. It's like you timed out. Yeah, you just made me re-log in. Like, what the heck is happening? Oh my goodness, so many emails. Helen Robertson. It doesn't matter. I only had 60%. That was immoral. When I looked last night, I only had 60% of people who had filled out the evaluation. So I, again, will look on Thursday morning, but if I don't have 90%, you don't get your bonus. So I don't know who has or hasn't, and I'm not gonna, I don't need to see anybody who did or didn't. And I give you the bonus to benefit you, but it's, I appreciate whoever has already filled out the evaluation. It's beneficial for me as your professor. I also super valuable so that I can. We have 73%. 73%. But it's super important for me to get your feedback. And if there are things that you liked or didn't like about the class, or things that you wanted to see improved, or didn't want to see, or things that you were like, no, this totally sucked, you need to change it. If you can say that in a nice, constructive way, not even a nice, you can be mean, constructive way, just as long as it's constructive. So yeah. Anyways, I think we're going to be done unless anybody has anything else. I've enjoyed having you in class. Just want you to know it's been lovely. You've been a lovely class to start this with, and to go Corona on the whole world, So anyways.
Do you
Boring.
have any last crazy news for us?
Let me think if I had any crazy news. I was I know I'm on the spot now. I saw that, I had this problem with, okay, Helen, did you see the actually this is a crazy thing. I'll tell you about that in a second. Did you see the people these protesters are going out and who are being like, let me out of my house, which you're like, okay, you're being an idiot, whatever. But like, did you see that they were trying to block the access to a hospital? Like there's this famous picture going around, or it's going viral, but it's like this picture of this nurse who's standing in front of this truck, and this lady's standing at the truck and she's yelling really loud with her sign. And it's like, these nurses are out there. And I was like, oh yeah, that looks like a really powerful picture, right? And then I like read about it, and what it was these protesters were trying to gridlock the roads in front of the hospital so ambulances couldn't get in or out. And I thought, my problem with that is how crazy that is, because it's not just, okay, fight all you want against, this idea that you're social distancing so that your grandma doesn't die. But hey, if you want your grandma to die, whatever, but like, why would you block a hospital? I mean, it just seems like that goes against all of the things what you're, that you're trying to, we talk about like the value of life, and we talk about the, the benefit and freedoms, and like, why would you not want to help support people like that? And evidently, like, the nurses, when the light was green, they would get out of the way and let the trucks move. But as soon as the light turned red, they would stop it so they couldn't block the road. And the cops were there and were like super friendly about it, and like we're making sure that these people didn't block the roads. But it was just, that's crazy news to me. That is crazy, people doing ridiculous things. I have other weird things, but.
About that protest, but I didn't realize that's what they were doing. Like, I feel like that's illegal in itself. Like, you can't block safety. Like, you can't block a hospital. I don't care what day it is. Like, that's.
No, you're right. It is illegal for them to do what they were trying to do. Which is part of the reason why, like, I think that the cops were there to like move, because it's public. What is it called? Disrupting the public, right? And so they could have gotten arrested. I think it was just that, and I support these, whether they were real nurses or not. I support these people kind of coming out and being like, no, hey, let's be chill about this. Yeah, it's blown my mind, and so I've kind of sat on that for a few days. I've been like, I can't believe this is the humanity we have. Or that do you remember at one point, I just kicked my table. Do you remember at one point we talked about that university that had reopened? Liberty University had reopened. I think we talked about it as a crazy news, and we were like, whoa, that's crazy. They're actually being sued right now because people got sick because they went back to the university. Yeah, right, Olivia. And I just, it was like, yeah. And part of the reason why is they didn't refund all the money, because they were like, oh no, well, we're still operating. We'll give you food. And they're like, but we can't live in our dorm rooms. And they're like, that's not our fault. And you're like, well, I mean, kind of could give the money back. The only other, so that was another. I feel like the crazy news right now is all about like this coronavirus. I had this one weird news, and it's on BBC again, and this is actually older. I think I read it like last year, so it's not a new thing, which means that they're probably like, let's have something that's not coronavirus. But there's this, it's sad. I bet I throw this out there. This is a sad crazy news, not like a happy crazy news. There are these whirlpools, right, that exist, and they like create these suction and vacuums, and people go down, and people like to go try to play in them, and then like swim out, right? And there's this photographer dude that was like, yeah, and this really sorry, Sahid is encouraging you all to do the evaluation. Thanks, Sahid. But this photographer was sucked into his whirlpool and he died, which is sad, which is the sad part of this. But it was just like, he was trying to like take photographs of this, and he barely got out one time, and then he went back again. And I was just like, this is my problem with this is, you survived once, don't do it again. Just move on. Just move on. And so, it's sad to think about that. Just want you to know, if you see whirlpools, don't try to jump in them. Not a good decision. I had no beer news for you, or no taps of beer, people having alcohol coming out. Yeah, does anybody have any weird news you want to bring up? I'm all ears.
I found something funny when I was researching for my paper,
Uh-huh.
and I was looking at like WTO disputes, and apparently now, I guess if it's the complaint is the European Union, is that on the European Union or they're bringing the complaint?
It could, yeah, can you repeat the first part of that? Because it could be either way.
So it says complaint European Union. I don't know. And then, but the title is Colombia anti-dumping duties on frozen fries from Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands. So someone's dumping some frozen French fries.
That's funny. I like that they're really fighting. Did you know? So we call them French fries, but Belgians say that Belgium created the French fry, and they're not French. They're Belgian, and so it's a big deal. Like when you go to Belgium, you can have pommes frites, which are fried potatoes, and they are the owners of the French fries. So you know how like we have like taco stands or like hot dog vendors, and you can go around and just get like tacos and hot dogs. They have pommes frites vendors, and they just little French fry stands, and you can go and you get your French fries with mayonnaise. Anybody been to Europe and ate the mayo? Mm-hmm. I'd been weird, and I had not had it until I went to Europe and I lived there, and I'm all about that mayo on my French fries. And what's funny is when they hear you're American, they're like, "You want the ketchup?" And you're like, "No, give me that mayo. Just slop it all on there." And then I thought this was weird is that they also have in Belgium, they also have at the same stands, they'll have these pommes frites, and they'll also sell you snails, like snails and butter and kind of escargot. I guess it's escargot, but like kind of cheap escargot. Yeah, it was good, but it was just like the weirdest thing is like I felt like that's like a fancy thing. You know, you sit in a restaurant and you got like your napkin. No, there's like, hey, you want your pommes frites in a little tray of little snails with green snot goo on it? But anyways, if you ever have a chance, mayo on your fries, you should try that. Just saying. Okay. I don't have any other crazy news. Well, actually, I am looking at weird news right now. I did see where Bansky, you know, the artist, has been drawing on the wall at home, and his wife is like ready to kick him out. And I feel like Bansky's going to be one of those people who like comes out and he's going to be this like really weird dude, and like nobody's like, you know, because nobody knows who he is, right? And so it's going to be like Bansky's this weird dude, you know, trying to get rid of him, or that nobody would be like, this is the guy, this is Bansky guy. Anyways, that's it. That's my. Sorry, I'm looking at all this there's ridiculous amount of things over here. I have this thing called weird news, and so this did you see the little old man who walked like so many meters in his backyard, just like back and forth in his little uniform? It was super sweet. I don't remember how far he walked, but he raised like a whole bunch millions of dollars to help support like, you know, sick people. I don't know. I can't remember all the details, which is why I'm telling. Anyways, that's it. I have no more weird news. I have no more news. Does anybody have anything else? If not, I'm going to let you go because I feel like I'm just filling in time. Because I'm chatty, because I'm at home by myself. I will see a lot of you in class this afternoon. And the rest of you, I am sad. I won't see you again. Let me know if I can help you in any way. You know, good luck in whatever you're doing after this class, whether that's grad school or whether you're going to be in the department around. If you are, you know, and we're still there, pop by. I'll say hi. You know, good luck with all of life. I think you all are good students, and you know, I think you'll be successful in whatever you're doing. So with that, I leave you. Bye. Stop the recording.